Hi everyone, welcome back to Deep Tech Forum. This is Rico Pang, and today we are honored to have Andre Konik, the author of the book and also the chairman of One Quantum. Welcome, Andre. How are you doing?
Good morning, Rico. Good morning, everybody from Miami Beach, where I'm watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean and looking forward to spending the next 30 minutes with you.
Thank you very much, Andre. Without further ado, let's start the chat and then presentation.
Let's talk about quantum computing, and
Yes.
to get us started, my first slide has a little quote here, very famous by Edward Deming, which says that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And that is going to be important a little later on in the presentation, but really the foundation of all the work that I do in quantum tech, which has been my exclusive focus for now 3.5 years. It's really looking at data in quantum tech. And the reason we're doing that is because our human brains are really just wired for cognitive biases. And this is the famous bias codex, probably one of those slides that nobody can read. But the gist of it is that the smarter you are, the more mechanisms and frameworks you develop to anchor your brain to past experiences, to external references, to certain external influences, and so forth. And this affects your decision making greatly, which again will be very important later on in this presentation. So stay tuned for that.
So Andre, can you reshare the screen again? It was not loading yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the cognitive bias codex, which divides human biases in different categories based on the anchors, the mental, psychological anchors that it presents. And this becomes important later on in the context of decision making in quantum tech, which is still such, while exploding, an immature technology and industry as an all. And that is really our mission, Interference Advisors, one of my companies. How do we take data, but more than just data, turn this into information and knowledge, and then really insights for our customers so that they can make decisions, hopefully rooted in wisdom, but at least better than based on human bias, hearsay, and whatever Forbes.com writes on any given day about the technology. So that's our goal. Before we get there, let's dream a little bit, talking about quantum computing and quantum technologies. What is actually possible with quantum computing?
And so, Andre, can you share the screen again? The screen is not sharing properly yet. Sorry to interrupt.
The screen is not sharing. Okay.
Yeah. Can you unshare and share again? Maybe there's some. Yep. It was working well early on. Yep. Now it's working. Can you put it on full screen? Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Let's continue.
Is this better? Yep.
Yep. You can close that.
Good.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. So this is the slide, if you didn't see it, that talks about the data and just another person with an opinion. We mentioned this cognitive bias codex. Again, one of those candy charts that nobody can really read at this point, but happy to share it later on. The point is that what we're trying to do is to look at data, information, knowledge, and really turn it into insights for our customers and partners, Interference Advisors being one of our customers, so that hopefully they can make decisions rooted in wisdom more than in bias, hearsay, or what the press is currently writing about quantum technologies. Before we look at what that actually currently is in terms of current state of quantum tech, let's dream a little bit. What is actually possible with quantum computing and quantum technologies? And here my hope is to make you dream big a little bit. Quantum computing, and you maybe have heard this promise before with other technologies, be it artificial intelligence or blockchain or virtual reality, but quantum technologies are really one of these technologies that can change the world. And I don't know anybody in quantum computing that does not firmly believe that. Some might not say it because they are afraid to, hurry the field and forget about the basic science that still needs to be done. But I think everybody dreams very big in quantum, and that is something that we need to bring back at the forefront. So what can we do with quantum computing? You all know Star Trek probably, beam me up, Scotty. This is a very basic principle of quantum technology, which we have done in the lab. My message here on the next 5-6 slides is that none of these things is crazy or futuristic. We understand the concepts. We do have the research for it. Some of it we've even done in the lab at the very, very tiny elementary level. We might not know yet how to do it in the real world, but it's really just a question of how do we get there, what are the resources required, and what is the timeline. And things like Star Trek with its different technologies, materials, sources of energy, beaming, health scanners, and so forth, are all rooted in technologies that can be found in quantum mechanics, made possible by quantum computing. This gentleman that you hopefully recognize, Tony Stark, is somebody else that relies a lot on the principles of quantum mechanics in terms of energy sources that power him, new materials, new weaponry. Also, there's a dark side to every new innovation, new technology that we cannot forget about. But he also has a very important concept, in my opinion, of business innovation that made him and Stark Enterprises successful that we need to look at in quantum computing. But everything that he does, again, is something that is used and rooted in quantum technologies and that theoretically we know how to do and are able to do. Back to the future. We have done this in the lab. We have actually time traveled in the lab at the very tiny elementary level and split second in terms of time and duration. But this is a fundamental quantum mechanical concept, how to travel in time, and we know how to do this. Nature. We see the beautiful water here, the mountains. They probably could use a little bit more snow on top of there. One of our biggest issues, climate change, right? Things like carbon extraction. Again, new materials, technologies to clean the water, to help forestation, etc. Are all fundamental principles of quantum mechanics, quantum physics, and related use cases in quantum sensing, quantum computing that we are currently exploring, and that again are just a matter of timeline and resources, but also a Tony Stark, and that will be a recurring theme in the sense of somebody that delivers this breakthrough innovation, not just on the technological side, but also on the business side, and we know how to do this. Sitting on the beach, right? That's what I hope to do here in Miami Beach. And unfortunately, I find myself working 12 hours a day, or fortunately, probably in these difficult times. But things like universal wealth, a very popular use case for quantum computing out there is the perfect optimized financial portfolio. Continuously rebalanced, optimal performance, basically free of charge. We know how to do this. We have not yet implemented it. There are things that are missing. We'll be talking about them in a few minutes. But this is a near-term potential application that can bring universal wealth to everybody. And that should be one of our goals. Talking about universal healthcare, personalized medicine, new drugs, new medications, new vaccines. Again, a fundamental, and many experts say maybe the most near term in terms of timeline application of quantum computing and quantum mechanics. The smart city, or the city of the future, and this is probably not my ideal city, too many high rises, and frankly looks a little stale to me. But the concepts behind a smart city and the city of the future, we talked about new materials, new sources of energy and so forth, but also the traveling salesman problem, which looks at logistics and traffic and supply chains that are very important in how we as a society live. Again, a very fundamental concept of quantum computing. We know how to solve this, we just need to do it. So that is what is theoretically possible with quantum computing, and that I dream about, and I know many people dream about, but are we really doing it? Let's take a look at where we are at today. Let's start with the quantum computing stack. And there are a lot of big words on here, and many of them you don't really need to worry about. Three things here that stand out. Number one, the quantum hardware. And that is at the very bottom in blue of this stack. How do we actually physically build the quantum computers? And that is something you read about in the news, and many of you probably know that they need to be kept very cold, that they are very sensitive to outside noise and interference. Probably some of you have read about qubit, the quantum bit count, and we're currently at around 53, that we need potentially millions of these qubits, but that we also need a measure of performance of these qubits, which is called quantum volume by some, which addresses the coherence and the speed of these qubits to measure the performance. We are far away. Honeywell just announced a computer 48 hours ago with a quantum volume of 512, which is a big, big step forward. Experts say we might need volume and qubit counts in the range of thousands, if not millions. So we are at the very beginning in terms of hardware of this technology, but all the big vendors and all the big startups make very credible claims in terms of technology and product roadmaps over the next 3 to 5 years on how to get there. So the message here is that quantum computing hardware, at the very beginning, a lot of problems to solve, but everybody believes we know how to get there. Some skeptics out there, of course, but the overwhelming opinion is that hardware is not the big challenge here. Above that, in a gist, you have quantum software. What is very interesting, we'll look at that in a second, there are actually more quantum software companies out there than quantum hardware companies, which is kind of funny, because if we don't know yet the final architecture of the hardware, how can we match the writing software? How do we know what compilers, what languages to use, what architecture to build it upon, and so forth? But there's a big ecosystem working on these efforts, and fueled by different community efforts. Just 2 weeks ago, our friend Worley launched quantumcomputing.com, which is a fantastic platform to implement templates, collaborate with other developers, and really work on the very specific use cases. Message with respect to quantum software, very similar to hardware. It is at the very beginning, but lots of people working on it. We have lots of resources on it. We have timelines and roadmaps to bring us to success. And while there are many problems to be solved, everybody here seems to be very optimistic. At the very top, quantum algorithms, and that is the actual math that describes everything that we just saw in this little dream of mine in quantum mathematics. What does time travel look like in quantum mathematics? And if you were to build a time travel machine like in the movie Back to the Future, what does this actual machine look like? How is it used, and how do we describe that quantum mathematically? Personally, this is my biggest area of concern. There has been historic work in quantum algorithms, which is very recognized and acknowledged in the community. There hasn't been many breakthroughs over the last few years in terms of new quantum algorithms that describe these use cases that we looked at in my dream, and more pragmatically in a couple slides. Quantum algorithms is what worries me, and where I really would keep an eye on progress in the near future. If we look at the near future, mathematically, and this is one way to slice it, which we did at my company, Interference Advisors, you have these areas of mathematical application on the left, such as prime factoring, Monte Carlo, optimization, machine learning. variable quantum eigensolvers, trying to map them to specific industries where these have applications. And I mentioned some of these: new materials, personalized medicine, biology and chemistry, traveling salesman type of problems in logistics and traffic. And you try to understand how, number one, imminent this possible solution is, and number two, how impactful it might be, expressed by the number of stars on the right side. And if you put those two together, you see there are very few errors where we have a near-term potential impact that is big. And that is where I start to worry. We have many potential use cases. There are very few use cases that are both quantum mathematically and, for an MBA, a business type, an investor like me that looks at the financial and business impact, that are both quantum impactful and business impactful at the same time within a near-term horizon. And this is really the core concern when I look at our industry, in my opinion. Looking at the industry, let's do that. And these numbers are a few months old, but you see that, well, you don't actually see, but the whole universe of quantum vendors and quantum startups is around 400 globally. It's very difficult to count because many are still spin-outs of a couple PhDs at a university that, you know, incorporate a legal entity. But you have roughly 150 or so large, well-known vendors and funded startups, and then another 300 or so small teams globally that are working not just on quantum computing hardware, algorithms, and software that we looked at a couple of slides ago, but other applications of quantum information science, such as quantum key distribution, which is related to encryption and breaking RSA, quantum sensing, quantum communications, and then consultants, investors, and media around it. Most notably, looking at the distribution and the growth, you see it's not great. If we map this on a global map, you see the other concern that is probably not surprising. A very high concentration in North America, obviously in the US, but also Canada, which is extremely strong, and that is due to an investment by Michael Lazaridis, the founder of BlackBerry, who put over 300 million of his personal money into quantum computing technologies many years ago. Europe, which is actually very strong individually, in the UK, in Germany, increasingly in France, Finland making a big splash on the scene recently, but doesn't have a coherent strategy. Australia, which has a very interesting and thriving program. You see Israel on here, which just announced a national quantum computing initiative. But those are the pockets. We're not really sure what happens in China. We're not really sure what happens in Russia. We have you know, some rumors and ideas and hypotheses, but this is centered in the big economies and not available to anyone but the big superpowers. We tried to do a market size forecast, and this is just in terms of revenues for those vendors that we've been discussing so far. And no matter how you slice and dice it, aggressive growth rates, more conservative growth rates, if you look 10 years out at 2030, it is somewhere around a $10 billion market in terms of revenue, which aligns with other analysts that have very similar forecasts. It's a great number, not a big market. The opportunity will come from a Tony Stark implementing a real breakthrough, universal healthcare, universal wealth, carbon extraction, whatever it might be, and upending an industry, potentially making many, many billions, if not trillions. The revenue, in our opinion, in terms of quantum technologies, will remain extremely small. That problem is further compounded by what the industry looks like. It looks white, male, and rather old. Here we looked at the leaders of 636 quantum tech vendors. We counted about 782 founders, CEOs, heads or vice presidents of quantum technologies. 716 of them were men. and 600 of them were white. Why is that? Because the top universities, and this is by spinouts, are the typical universities. And they lack a lot of diversity, of course. It's great to see so many successful white men in this field and all these fantastic universities, but that is not enough to be successful. We need to spread it, democratize it, make it accessible. Quantum tech investments by quantum information science application. You see on the left side the numbers here, which overall are extremely low. You also see how different fields of quantum technology are continuously decreasing in investments, and you see how 2020 overall was a challenging year. We counted just a little above 1 billion in private capital, not government initiatives, but angels, venture capital, a little bit of private equity that went into quantum technologies with an average deal size of 14.2 million. There were two huge deals in there. Statistical outliers that accounted for half of it. You take those out, you're looking at just about 500 million in terms of capital invested into quantum computing. If you look at the sources of that capital on the left and the targets of that capital on the right, you see the same picture emerging that we had a couple slides ago, highly concentrated in those epicenters of powers. Not surprising, but worthy to point out, and again, part of the problem here. If you look at the distribution of these funds by application on the left side and by funding type, seed stage versus A round and later stage rounds, you further see this problem crystallize, especially if you look at the stages of funding and remember that we had these two large deals, which is why we have two C rounds, one that's a long tail end in blue and another one in red underneath it. Venture capitalists, private equity haven't caught on to investing into quantum computing yet. It's still an angel and seed, a little bit of an A round game, but this just means it's more on the risk capital side than the real institutional money side. This changed dramatically yesterday with one of our startups, IonQ, announcing a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company, through which they did a reverse merger and went public in a deal valued at $2 billion and a raise of 650 million. So that in itself is more than all of 2020 combined, excluding those outliers. So these kinds of deals and that kind of money and resources, extremely important in quantum computing if it is being used in the right way. Another chart that you can read, but happy to send it to you. This is just looking at the use cases, more specifically, less in a dream world, but in a real enterprise world. The message here is you have a few areas of application, and this maps to my chart that I did with algorithms and the little stars. You're looking at technology, you're looking at industrial goods, at chemistry and pharma, at finance, at energy, at logistics. And when you break that down, which is the middle column, you're looking at things like optimizing electrical batteries, optimizing vehicle routing, optimizing high frequency financial portfolios. All extremely important fields of application. In the end of the day, very difficult to implement and execute on, and with probably not a very high enterprise or business impact. So this just underscores the challenge that I see. What is quantum not? And we have a few slides to get through here in a couple of minutes. What quantum is not, in my opinion, is consumer technology. It never will be, and it never should be. There are people working on desktop type of quantum computers. I spoke to somebody yesterday that said we need the iPhone of quantum computing. I don't see any application for quantum computing in the consumer market, at least not in the next few decades. In my opinion, it's not even an enterprise technology. I don't see why any big company needs quantum computing as a real infrastructure. And the reason is it's not an incremental technology. It is not something, and now we go back to my dream, that is meant to make any kind of application or area of use 5, 10, 15% better. Even if 5, 10, or 15% might be great for an enterprise, it's not disruptive. And the effort and resources required in quantum to get there with all the implementation afterwards is way too big to make this worthy. Quantum computing, for me, is a breakthrough. How do you disrupt all ways of doing? How do you bring a new perspective? And how do you create something really new? So what is this gap between the current state that we just looked up at and our dream? The industry is run, and I mean this lovingly and with enormous respect, because they are all extremely smart, but it's run by PhDs in physics or chemistry or math or philosophy. We're lacking business smarts, and we're lacking this ability to dream big, which PhDs inherently not have. I'm not saying there's nobody that doesn't have it, but structurally, it's not the Tony Stark or Elon Musk type of mentality. And that is a big problem for an industry that is taking all this angel and seed money and now doing IPOs. And there is a big conflict here of behavior that I see happening in the industry. Also, what it is not is this play small time of trickle some money on it and marathon in the long term. It is something that requires big resources. And we just talked about IonQ and its 2 billion SPAC. We need people that are really willing to commit money to it, like Michael Lazaridis did many years ago in Canada. Without that, we will just make incremental improvements in quantum hardware, quantum software, and algorithms. Industry, investors, and governments potentially too will get fatigued of progress, and we might potentially never ever get there. And this might be the same point once again, but we need people that believe in this dream. If we have folks that are looking at SWOTs, strategy, weaknesses, opportunity, threats, a typical MBA business time of framework, and find little opportunities here and there, and how do I make this use case, this application better, we're not going to be successful, because the implementation at the enterprise level is not going to be possible and justified. We need somebody with, pardon the words, with balls and independent from the gender, but we need to bring a paradigm shift to how we think. We need somebody like Tony Stark that really delivers breakthrough, not just on the technology, but also on the business side. How do we close this gap? And that is my last slide. Churchill said it, never let a good crisis go to waste. And we really need a coalition of change that brings money, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and decision makers together and decides this is a strategic priority, but potentially also a strategic opportunity for a government, and some of our governments are working on it, but potentially for an industrial sector, for a technological solution, for healthcare, for climate change, and really put this creativity, this dream big, together with the technology and the financial resources to make it happen. And it's as simple, but yet as complicated as that. My name is Andre Koenig. You have my contact information at the bottom right. It was a pleasure to share my vision on the current state and future of quantum computing with you. And if we have a minute or two, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andre. Great presentation. I think I have no questions so far. I think you have mentioned the points that I mentioned in my opening remarks. I think we are aligned on the vision, and I think the whole community, the sector has to come together and do this together. Yeah. I think we are good with the timing. Thank you very much, Andre, for joining us today. We should catch up soon, and all the best in Miami. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. Have a great day and great evening, wherever you're calling from.
Thank you.